Today we're going to talk about the recent price action in Bitcoin and altcoins, especially since Bitcoin recently reached the top of $20,000 and since then has been trailing off. And in the meanwhile, we've seen altcoins start to take off. And nothing exemplifies that better than this chart that shows Bitcoin's dominance relative to other cryptocurrencies, because you can see that earlier in the month, if I can actually get this, looks like I'm not going to be able to get to the top of this peak, but it was roughly 65.5% market dominance for Bitcoin. And you can see here that we've trailed off all the way down to roughly 44% market dominance, which if you watched my last video, you know that I consider Bitcoin a buy, or a relative buy is what I should say, at 45% market dominance. Now, what does that mean? Well, I still think that the cryptocurrency market as a whole is overvalued. However, I think that Bitcoin relative to altcoins is a more attractive investment if you want to stay in the market at the moment. As a result of that, I've decided to start shifting some of my altcoin investments into Bitcoin, because I suspect that at some point here, Bitcoin is going to bounce back in terms of dominance, and it's going to be difficult to predict which altcoins are going to do well in that scenario, because in most cases, we see practically the entire industry, or whatever you want to call it, fall against Bitcoin when it gets all of the spotlight. And that's on both the upside and the downside. Really, it seems that altcoins do fairly well when Bitcoin isn't doing a lot, when it trades sideways or just slowly drifts off. When there's a lot of action in Bitcoin, all of the attention comes back and this market dominance figure starts to increase. So I have not deployed new cash into Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. I've simply done a little bit of reshifting in my portfolio so that I now have more Bitcoin than I did before relative to my altcoins. Now, there are still altcoins that I consider to be undervalued. You guys know my opinion on Ether because I've mentioned it a number of times at this point, but my target price for Ether is 5.5 to 6 million Satoshi, and you can see that we're getting closer and closer to that figure. Right now on GDAX, we are sitting right at that 5 million Satoshi level, and so we are starting to get closer to the point where we might be able to see Ethereum actually reach that level of 5.5 to 6. And at that point, I will take some off of the table, and I will still have a substantial position in Ether, with the next target being 7 million Satoshi. And then obviously I'll make an update video at that point. As for Litecoin, I am no longer all that... I don't really like the move that Charlie Lee made. People are offering all sorts of different opinions on it. I guess I'll put in my 2 cents. I think that Charlie Lee should not have sold his Litecoin. You know, he says that it's not the same thing as a CEO selling all of his stock because he actually created Litecoin, or that it's his baby, and as a result of that, he has every incentive to see it be successful. And I understand that to a limited extent, but there are plenty of situations where the founder of a company is also the CEO. And even in those scenarios, people expect for the CEO to have a certain percentage of the company just so that he has a financial incentive to increase the value of it for the shareholders. Now, it's not the exact same thing for Litecoin, of course. I know there's going to be a bunch of comments that tell me that Litecoin is not a stock, but it applies the same principles of governance as a stock does. He should have a fiscal incentive to make Litecoin worth as much as possible. So I don't agree with his decision. I think he's starting to crack under the pressure, which I totally understand. It's difficult to deal with the public eye, but he's been dealing with it for such a long time now. You would expect for him to get used to it. So I'm a little disappointed with Charlie, to be honest with you, and as a result of that, I'm less bullish on Litecoin. Obviously, Litecoin is an entity with or without Charlie, but I don't know, it's just disappointing in my opinion, and I think that there's better alternatives in the market at the moment. Now, Bitcoin Cash, as I mentioned in the video where I said it was going to come down very quickly, some of you mentioned in my last video that because Bitcoin Cash didn't go down immediately like I said it would, I was wrong. Well, obviously I didn't anticipate that Bitcoin Cash was going to halt in trading within the first 3 minutes or so. And obviously once this opened up again, we did have a little bit of a pump, but now we're all the way back down here at 3.3 thousand, and we have tested below that $3,000 level during the trading hours. So Bitcoin Cash has sold off. The entire market has sold off for the most part. Looks like Bitcoin is really starting to recover very well here as we speak, and it should be a very interesting time in the market at the moment. But for once, I'm a little bit more bullish on Bitcoin than I generally tend to be. Now, I still think that the market as a whole is overvalued, but in terms of Bitcoin as a relative investment, I find it more attractive. If you guys have been following the channel for a while, you know that I started becoming more bearish on Bitcoin back at around the beginning of October here, because that was when Bitcoin started to see this huge bullish stretch against all altcoins. Altcoins started getting slaughtered, and Bitcoin went straight up. And I don't know exactly what the top is. I don't remember anymore. It may have been, I think, 7,000, somewhere in that ballpark. And then when SegWit 2x got canceled, I actually turned bullish on Bitcoin because I felt this huge weight got removed from its shoulders. And since then, or roughly right after then, we started to see Bitcoin sell off, and I bought Bitcoin right at this bottom point here at 5,500 when it looked like Bitcoin Cash was going to cause the cashening. So I will say that at this point, obviously there hasn't been a lot of times where Bitcoin has gone below 50% market share, but I tend to think that it's going to bounce back because, as I mentioned previously, anytime that Bitcoin goes below that 50% dominance level, anytime that we see a bunch of attention shift over to Bitcoin, that dominance level starts to increase. And now obviously that hasn't happened a ton of times, so we can't tell for sure that it's going to happen again. However, I anticipate that it will, because really, just anecdotally, you can note that anytime all of the eyeballs are on Bitcoin, everybody else suffers, no matter whether or not it makes any sense. Now, there are still some altcoins, in addition to Ethereum, that I'm holding at the moment that I haven't sold off to Bitcoin. However, there are others that I have decided to sell a reasonable portion of my position. For example, I decided to sell a decent portion of my waves. The reason I decided to do that is not because I don't believe in waves at all, but because it was sort of the weak link among the altcoins that I own. A lot of you know, to a limited extent, that I actually did go shopping for altcoins when we saw this initial huge run up earlier in the month, and I asked you guys for your opinions on what altcoins you guys were going to pick up while Bitcoin was having this massive bull run. Now, I did end up actually picking those altcoins a little bit earlier than their lows. For example, I decided to pick up 10x at, well, let's see if I can find it. So I decided to pick up 10x at roughly 10,000, or excuse me, 15,000 Satoshi, but it did go all the way down to 10,000. So that was unfortunate in the sense that I could have had a much higher return, but I'm still obviously quite happy with my buy-in price at 15,000 Satoshi now that we're up 50% total. Against Bitcoin, that is. Obviously against the US dollar. Well, actually, I think Bitcoin's gone down since I bought into it. So against the US dollar, I'm up a little bit less for once because Bitcoin's not going insane. Overall, I think the market still needs to experience a correction before I start deploying new cash into it. And I would like to see Bitcoin come down to at least somewhere in the $11,000 to $12,000 area before I start deploying more cash into the market. Right now, cash is a fairly substantial position within my portfolio. So until we start to see a more substantial correction than this, I'm probably not going to deploy new capital into the market. Unless maybe we break, if we reach up to 30,000, then all of a sudden 20,000 is going to look very attractive. So just because of the price memory factor. So my buy-in price might increase if Bitcoin decides to skyrocket, but until it does, I'm going to keep my buy-in price at roughly 11,000 to 12,000, and I'll be ready to scale that up all the way to roughly 8,000, at which point, if it goes lower than that, then we're probably dealing with something fairly serious, and I will issue a video update. But until then, that's what I'm waiting for with Bitcoin before I start to deploy new capital into the market, because I think everybody thinks that Bitcoin is overextended at the moment, even with the correction that we've been seeing in it. Hopefully this loads. it's really not. This is the really annoying part about GDAX lately, is because for whatever reason they're not loading the full charts, and sometimes I'm fortunate and they load, other times it's like this. And I know the pricing data is there, it's just not displaying for whatever reason. But anyway, the point is, I do want to wait for a correction in Bitcoin before I start adding more cash into it. But in terms of my altcoin positions, I have started to shift some of those into Bitcoin, because I think Granddaddy Bitcoin at some point here, the eyeballs are going to switch back onto him. And when they do, we usually see a little bit of a bloodbath in the altcoin market. And furthermore, when Bitcoin starts to fall, which I do anticipate at some point we are going to see a more substantial correction, then altcoins tend to follow it. I mean, there are exceptions where if it trails off, then obviously altcoins start to do well. But when Bitcoin starts tanking, which I think there is a chance that it does, then altcoins tend to not do so well. So that's the situation I'm hoping for at some point here, because Bitcoin tends to do well against altcoins in situations like those, and then I can deploy more cash into the market at some point here. As usual, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you would like to interact with me, my Steemit tends to be fairly active. I respond to most relevant comments. For example, this was a fairly active post, as you might imagine from the title, and I responded to almost all comments, even exceptionally long ones like this one. And there are some very good high-value comments where you can learn a lot, just like this one. I was very happy reading this one, by the way. Please leave me comments like this. It takes me a while to read them and actually get to the meat of them in terms of responses, but I do respond to most comments on Steemit just because there's a monetary incentive for me to do so for both you and me. And then in addition to that, there's fewer comments, so I'm able to keep up with it a little bit better than the hundreds of comments that I get on YouTube for all of my videos. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and as usual, leave a like, comment, and subscription, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.